Hello, I am here because I have a stack of books that during my big shelf reorganization, I didn't feel confident in putting these back on my shelves that I wanted to read them. I wasn't sure about it. So, what I'm going to be doing today is trying chapters of all of these, and not just today. I will also probably need tomorrow as well because it is 9 o'clock at night already. But I'm going to try a chapter of all of these and decide if I'm going to shelve it and keep it for now, or if I am pretty sure I'm not going to read it and I can go ahead and pass it along to someone else. So I thought I would just introduce all the books really quickly, give you their genre but not a synopsis, and then I'll go read and come and tell you what I think about them. The first one is by Barbara Kingsolver. It's a collection of essays called High Tide in Tucson, and I found this at a little free library, and I thought it would be interesting because I've heard good things about her writing. I have the Poisonwood Bible on my shelves, and this is an author who I own 2 books by, but I haven't tried. So if I try this one, that will help meet my 2025 goals of trying all those authors. So I thought I'd try an essay from this, just see how I feel about her writing, how I feel about reading essays, because I don't do a lot of reading them physically, and so I think that would be interesting. Next, we have 2 random writing books that I picked up. This one is The Way of Story, The Craft and Soul of Writing by Catherine Ann Jones. It's just about writing, and I just want to get a feel for what is actually in this book and see if I want to keep it to eventually read. And then same with this one, John Gardner, The Art of Fiction, Notes on Craft for Young Writers. I think I've heard of John Gardner. He was like a famous writing teacher. And this is a little old. This is from 1983. So I'm not 100% sure how relevant it is, but I thought I would just read a little bit of it, see if it's something I think I'd like to sink my teeth into. Then we have what I've heard described as many different genres, but it's Belle Fleur by Joyce Carol Oates. I read some Joyce Carol Oates in a creative writing course, and I didn't love her writing. So when I found this at a library book sale, I picked it up because it sounds interesting. It's supposed to be kind of like spooky. It's like this long generational novel. There's like more books that she wrote that are kind of in the same vein. So if I like it, there's lots to read. But I'm just not sure if I'm really into Joyce Carol Oates as a writer, and I need to try this and see if it's something that intrigues me. Next, we have a book that I've been reading for almost 2 years. This is a selection of fairy tale retelling stories by a bunch of different authors, and I'm not sure how I feel about this. I used to really cling on to fairy tale retellings. That was something I grew up reading and loving. And I think over time, I like them a little bit less. And in this one in particular, I was just really not loving most of the stories that were in here, which was making me not want to read it. However, I kept it because there are some authors on here that I'm like, man, I'd really like to try their writing. There's Agarth Nix, Jane Yolen, Michelle West. I have some books by her, so I'd like to try that one. Kelly Link, I'm not a huge fan of. Patricia Briggs, I've heard of her. There's a Jeff Vandermeer story that I'd be interested in reading. And so I'm kind of at this thing where it's like I've been working on this for so long, and I'm really like, I have to force myself to pick this up, and I'm not sure why. So I almost wonder if I should just read the author's work so I'm interested in, call it good, and then go ahead and pass it on. So I thought maybe I would try like one story by someone I love or someone who I'm interested in reading, and then pass it on from there. Then I have 2 books by Francine Rivers. I have struggled with the past couple of Francine Rivers books that I've read. I used to read and love her work, and I don't know if it's just I've changed as a reader and I'm not enjoying it as much, or if I just read the books by her that were going to work for me and the other ones aren't. So I have 2 that I want to try. The first is Marta's Legacy, book number 1, called Her Mother's Hope. This is like a duology, and it's about like a mother-daughter relationship. So I want to try this one. And then this one called Leota's Garden. This is one of her older ones, I believe. So I really want to try this one because I did like her older work. This is in 1999. I don't know anything about the plot of this one, but I would like to give it a try and see if I'm going to find that I enjoy her books, or maybe I'm just kind of done with them. This is a book I got for fairly cheap. I think $5, maybe less. The sticker might not tell it. This is Wandering Stars by Sholem Aleichem. He is the author of Tevier from Fiddler on the Roof. I don't know if he wrote Fiddler on the Roof or what, but it says he created Fiddler on the Roof, and that is one of my favorite characters in one of my favorite musicals of all time. And so this is just about like a Yiddish theater, and I just think that sounds really interesting, but I'm not 100% sure if I'll like it. But I was like, I gotta give it a try. And so I think I'm more likely to keep this one than get rid of it, but I thought putting it on this stack is going to make me at least try it, so it'll be less of an unknown. And then the final one I think is going to be an easy pass, and that's Lovecraft. I read one of these stories and was very underwhelmed by it. I did not care for it at all. I know like Lovecraft was like a terrible person and had a lot of terrible views, and I think that's maybe just spoiled me for enjoying his work. Like, I'd rather read someone tweaking Lovecraft and putting a less racist spin on it than actually like enjoying his work. But I would like to read like one more story and just see if it sparks anything within me. But really, the writing style didn't work for me for the first story that I read, so it's probably going to be a pass. But those are the books I have. 9 of them. Sure wish I would have had one more, but this is where we're at. So I'm going to go read some chapters, and I'll come back in and check in with you when I know how I feel. Okay, so I decided to start with High Tide in Tucson because I was like, it'll be really easy to jump in and try an essay. And I read the preface and most of the first essay, and I think that this just isn't for me. I think there's a couple things. One is that nonfiction essays are not something I'm super familiar with, so I don't really know if I like them, or if I do, like what kinds that I like. I've only listened to like a few on audiobook and haven't really read a lot. And I don't know, I just felt like the first one was very like meandering. Like, she just kept talking about like all these different things and jumping around, and I kind of felt like, okay, I've kind of gotten the point from it already, and like you just keep talking about different aspects of the point in a way that felt a little rambly. I will say the writing is very good, so that makes me hopeful for reading the Poisonwood Bible, because I did really like her writing. I just think that the essays, even if I read one and kept it on my shelves, I think I would just let this linger on my shelves for so long. Like, I could see myself not picking this up for like 5 years, which is not something that I really want. Like, I want to be keeping books that I'm excited about. So I'm going to let this one go, and no skin off my back. I found it at a little free library. I'll drop it off at a little free library. Back with another update because I have made decisions on 2 more books for this little challenge of figuring out what I'm doing with them. So I tried a chapter of Marta's Legacy by Francine Rivers. This is sorry. This is Her Mother's Hope. It's in the series Marta's Legacy. And this is like a family saga series. It's like a duology by Francine Rivers. She's a Christian historical fiction author. And I do not think this is going to be one for me, especially after looking up reviews. I think that as she has written more and more later in life, I feel like she's gotten very heavy-handed with what she's trying to get across. I found that with another book of hers, I think it's called like The Masterpiece, where it was about like a graffiti artist, and within like 10 pages, you know almost exactly how the story is going to end up. She's like really getting those themes down. So like in the first chapter, she's like really focused on this girl Marta who's like being abused, and her dad like doesn't want her to go to school anymore. And it's just very like heavy-handed. You're supposed to know like just how oppressed she is, telling you like over and over and over what she wants you to get out of it. And I found that really frustrating because it's just so not subtle in a way that doesn't let me interact with the story, because the story is telling me how I should feel, what I should think. So I'm going to pass on this one. I'm going to give Leota's Garden a try. And I don't know if it's like an age thing, as she's like aged as an author, or if it's the Christian publishing environment, like maybe they want themes to be more explicitly stated. I think that's one of the things that I have gotten more and more frustrated with Christian fiction over time, is that there's no room for nuance in any of the story. Things are very black and white. They have like a specific structure that they want each book to follow, with like someone not being a Christian, someone being like a perfect Christian, and then like living such a perfect life that this person like sees the light and comes to Christ, and there's this huge like redemptive story, when it often doesn't feel very realistic because it looks nothing like real life, and a lot of the worlds feel very like sanitized, where it's like it's not really digging into like the nitty-gritty of like what it might mean to try to live a Christian life in the real world. And it just feels like there are all these like straw man arguments where they set up these really flimsy like villains, and then they just like tear them down like, ha. And it's like, okay, but no one is actually like that in real life. Like, that's not like, people aren't like that. They're not so one-dimensional and evil. Like, there's so much more nuance to life. And I just find that Christian fiction more and more is leaning more towards that very like sanitized, like we're not even going to talk about real life. Like, so many of them talk about like Western, like historical romances are a very big thing. And they'll like talk about like Native Americans coming and attacking people and how they have to fight against them. And like there's never any discussion about like Native Americans being people. They're not just like a Western enemy for the cowboys. Like, they were a people. Their land was being taken over. They were being pushed out time and time again. And there's never any discussion about that. Like, that sort of like sanitized history of like, we're not actually gonna like talk about anything. And so then the story just feels so empty because there's no nuance. And then H.P. Lovecraft, I just don't desire to read him. There are better people to give my time and energy to than H.P. Lovecraft. I don't care if he's like the grandfather of horror fiction. Like, I don't care. He's a terrible person. I don't need to like look for it in his work. I just find that every time I pick it up, I'm like, even if I like it, he was an awful person, and that makes me not want to read his work, because I don't love separating art from the artist. Authors like David Eddings and Neil Gaiman, it's just like, I can't read your work without knowing like what kind of person you are. And I know we can't know what all our authors that we read are like, and they don't have to be perfect people, but like, if I know you're an abuser and I'm reading your work, that just feels icky to me. I don't want to read your work if you are a known abuser. So I think that applies to this. Just the more I've thought about it, the more I'm like, if I know Lovecraft is a terrible person, I don't want to give my time and energy to him. I'd rather read something better. So I'm going to keep going. I have 6 books left that I need to make a decision on. I'm back and I have made decisions on all the rest of the books. I'll go ahead and talk about the other Francine Rivers because I just feel like I felt the exact same way about this book as I did the other one. I think her writing style just is not working for me anymore, and I might just not really enjoy reading her books anymore. So I'm going to let this one go. I looked at the 2 writing craft books. I looked at this one first. This is The Way of Story, The Craft and Soul of Writing. And I think this one was just a little too loosey-goosey. I like a practical sort of craft book, and this was, the craft and soul of writing. So it is focused very much on, like, it was talking about getting into the mindset of, like, being a shaman and, like, bringing stories to people. And I just prefer more, like, the practical side of writing craft. Like, I guess I think of myself as a storyteller already and as a writer. So when I'm reading craft books about writing, I don't need to be told that I am a writer or conceptualize being a writer in another way. I want to know, like, learn more about writing itself. So I'm going to pass on this one. And then this one, John Gardner, The Art of Fiction, Notes on Craft for Young Writers. I'm going to pass on this one because it was very snobbish. In the introduction, he talks a lot about, like, junk fiction and serious fiction. Clearly, like, genre versus literary fiction. Like, he talked about, like, if you're writing a literary fiction novel, you need to make sure that, like, you're not making mistakes. But if you're writing, like, a mystery novel, like, who cares? And I was like, what? I know that this is, like, an older book, but genre fiction is super popular, and it's great and fabulous. It's almost entirely what I read. I read some literary fiction, but I love genre fiction. I've always been drawn to it my entire life. So I was like, I don't really care what you have to say about writing because you and I think about stories in a very different way. Then I tried Wandering Stars, and this one I'm going to keep. I'm not 100% sure if I love it, but I read the first chapter, which was kind of short. It was like 6 pages. But I enjoyed the writing style, and I'm not sure with it being like an epic that takes place over a long period of time if I'll like that, because that's not always my favorite. But this book was originally written in like 1910, and it was in 2009 when this book got a reprint and a new translation. Apparently the old translation like did not do a good job, and so this is a newer translation that's supposed to be a lot better. And this author, Sholem Aleichem, I'm guessing, is the author of the musical Fiddler on the Roof, which is one of my favorite musicals of all time. It's seriously so good. And so I want to try this just because I love the thoughts that Fiddler on the Roof brings up about, like, tradition and moving on and a world changing and people that want to stay the same, and how do you deal with all that, and your children are in a different world than you were born in. Like, Fiddler on the Roof is so good, and it makes me think every time I watch it, I think about it in a different way. And so I really want to try this author, and because I like the writing style overall, it still felt fairly modern, even though it's written quite a long time ago, it still felt fairly modern. So I'd like to give this one a try. And then Belle Fleur by Joyce Carol Oates. This one's going to be a pass for me. I could just tell from the first few pages that the writing style of this one is written to be very dense, very descriptive. almost Dickensian, I would say, in the amount of description. And while I'm somewhat interested in the story of it, I don't think the writing style would help me enjoy the story. I think it would hold me back from enjoying the story. It's just, this is tiny print, and there's just like these like giant paragraphs. Like, I struggle so much with those kinds of things in writing, and it's talking in these very like big like swaths of a paintbrush where it's just telling you about like years of history, and it kind of makes my eyes glaze over a little bit. So I'm going to pass on this one, which is fine. I picked it up at a library book sale, which they were selling books by the bag. So I was like, well, I'll throw it in there. We'll see. And it didn't work for me, and that's okay. So then the final book that I want to talk about is Happily Ever After. This is one I've been struggling with, and I didn't know what to do. And I think I just need to not stress about this sitting on my shelves, because every time I think about getting rid of it, I'm like, wait, but there are authors in here that I want to try. So I think I just need to let myself take it slow with this one and not force myself to read it and not stress about it hanging out. Storygraph introduced like a new feature where you can like pause books that you're not currently reading but you do want to go back to one day. So this has been paused, and I can just pick it up when I want to, read a story, put it down, and then if I'm ever like, okay, I've read all the stories I want to read from here, I can pass it on. But, you know, I think right now there's still some interest, clearly, because I'm hanging on to it forever. So I'm going to keep it and not worry about it too much. So I'm keeping 2 out of that giant stack, and I'm getting rid of 6 of them. So that's awesome. That feels really good. I'm glad my instincts were fairly correct about the books that I didn't want to put back on my shelves because I wasn't sure about them. It turns out that most of them I didn't want to read. So that's pretty good. And then I'm more excited about these having made a decision to like keep them instead of them being like a question mark in my mind. I feel like I'm more likely to pick them up now. So all in all, that was successful. It'll be nice to give these books a chance to go to a new home. I'll drop them off in little free libraries somewhere, and that'll be fabulous.